Hey guys, welcome to this session on top 10 JavaScript frameworks by Intellipaat. In this session, we'll take a look at what are the top 10 JavaScript frameworks available for us to use as web developers. These frameworks can be used as backend developers, front-end developers, full stack developers. If you're a person who deals with web on a day-to-day basis, these frameworks can be a lot of help to you. So let's get started and understand what are the frameworks available for us to use and how we can use them. Before we begin, do consider clicking on the subscribe button and clicking on the bell icon. Also click like and comment down below to let us know what else would you like us to do. Also, if you have any questions during this presentation, please put it in the chat box. Our representatives will be more than happy to answer your questions. Alright, let's begin. Let's take a look at the agenda for the session. We'll begin by taking a look at what are JavaScript frameworks. We assume that you know JavaScript, but you don't know what frameworks are, so we start from complete scratch. We'll demystify what frameworks are, and from there on we'll build on the top 10 frameworks. Then we'll take a look at where are JavaScript frameworks used. So what are the use cases? Where are they used? What are the places where JavaScript frameworks make sense? Then we'll take a look at a few front-end frameworks, a few of the most popular front-end frameworks, and we'll describe what these are. And then after we are done describing some of the most popular ones, we'll take a look at when to use which one. Then comes backend frameworks. You can choose a backend framework of your own choice, but we'll try and keep it brief and show you what are the different kinds of backend frameworks available for you in JavaScript, of course. And then we'll take a look at which one is best suited for your use cases. And then finally, we'll take a look at a few full stack frameworks. So if you're a full stack developer, backend developer, front end developer, this presentation can be helpful for all of these kinds of tasks. So let's begin. So what are JavaScript frameworks? So before we begin understanding about JavaScript as a whole, we first need to understand what are the frameworks and what do they do. So framework, like many other frameworks, is just a library of code. Even in JavaScript or any other coding language that you use, JavaScript frameworks are code libraries. They take care of a lot of common repetitive features that need to be built or implemented in an application. When you're building a web application, think about the things that you need to consider. Think about the features that you have to build for any aspect of the application regarding front end, back end, or even full stack. For front end, you need to build a specific set of features such as routing in the application. If it's a single page application, which is essentially why JavaScript is used on the front end. In case you're not aware, single page applications are just applications in which JavaScript is served, and from there on all the interactions are taken care of by Java. So when the user clicks on a link, and instead of refreshing the whole page, you just want to change the URL and change the content that is being displayed, you use single page applications. Now changing the URL and keeping that in sync with the browser history is the part that's known as routing. So it's a little complicated than it might seem, and you might need to implement it on your own. When you do it, then you have other applications in which these features are needed, and you need to do this again and again and again. That's a bit problematic because you're just repeating the code that you have written. And if you come across a bug in the fourth application that you're building, in the routing aspect of it, then you need to update it in all the three previous applications as well. That's the first aspect. Now the second aspect is that not just routing, but there are many other common tasks as well, such as getting data from the server, synchronizing your application with the backend data, and understanding the user interactions and how to keep your page active and responsive most of the time. These could be really difficult to build, and since you need to build them again and again, this could be really hard to do that again and again as well, and adapting them to your specific use cases. This is where frameworks come into play. Even in backend and full stack, we use JavaScript frameworks. In backend, we need to firstly understand how the request is given to us, parse the request from the text, then separate requests and their parameters and their values, then generate a response and send it back in an appropriate format as well. And in full stack frameworks, we need to do both. So that's what is needed here. And this is why frameworks are so important. This is why many companies and developers require people to know a little bit about those frameworks. Not just because these frameworks are important and should be used, but because when you're using these frameworks, they really speed up the process through which you write code. So if you're building an application in which you are building the routing part again, if it's already built for you, then you cut down that part really significantly. All you need to do is understand how to configure that. This is where frameworks come into play. So now let's take a look at where are JavaScript frameworks used. So JavaScript frameworks are used in several aspects of a web application. If you've ever built a web application, you know that JavaScript frameworks are some of the most important aspects of it. Especially if you're building a JavaScript application, which is an application that uses JavaScript on front end and back end, and minimal use of HTML is there in the front end, and minimal use of other languages is there in the back end. So let's take a look at where they're used one by one. So on the front end, as we have discussed that on the front end, we need some sort of common features to be built again and again. Let's discuss them for a bit. First of them is routing, which we have already taken a look at. Then comes data management. So if you have an API server that you have built in any language, preferably JavaScript, but if in any language, you need to firstly make sure that you can get data from it. You can post data to it. You can request the data to be updated that you have already posted to the server. You want some data to be deleted. You need to pass in some data for your application's backend to authorize you and authenticate you. And there are many other kinds of things that you need to do as well. So for front end, you need to be able to interact with the back end. You need to be able to keep the user data in sync with the application's display of data. Basically, if the data updates in the background, you need to show that updated data everywhere that is being displayed on a web page. So that's one aspect. Second is understanding the user interface composition. Where does which element go and how to update that element most efficiently. And for doing these kinds of tasks, you need to write a lot of code. Majority of tasks are done solving the technical issues that we have rather than building the applications itself. So that could be an issue. This is where the front-end frameworks come into play. So what are the front-end frameworks available to you? We'll take a look at those in a moment. But in just understanding that these are the kinds of options available to us can be a huge source of benefit for us. All right, let's take a look at backend. So backend, as the name suggests, is the part of the application that deals with the request response cycle. It runs on the web server. What it does is that it gets the data from the web from a request from the front end, and then that front end could be anything, could be a command line application, could be a web application, could be a mobile application. Any application that is capable of sending a well formatted request over an internet connection is a client. Now we want to get data from the client front end, and when we get that, we want to parse. Again, there are several tasks that need to be done here. From request authentication, authorization, understanding how the request is to be parsed, what to do when the request is invalid, what to do if the user is not authorized, how to authorize the user, how to update the data that the user has asked us to store, how to manage the data, how to propagate the data. There are a lot of common tasks that need to be done. And routing is also something that needs to be done on the back end. If you're not just serving data, but you're also serving web pages that are dynamically populated, you need to understand how to route the application. When the user requests a particular URL on your website, how do you show that this URL is going to map to this web page, which needs to be built in this way? These are all the tasks that seem complicated, and they are very complicated, but there are frameworks that can help you do that. Different kinds of frameworks do different kinds of things, and they all have different philosophies. We'll discuss them when we get to them. But backend also needs a framework. Then comes full stack development. This is where you are building an application both front end and back end. Now you could in theory choose a front end framework, build the front end in that, then choose a back end framework, build the back end in that, and then integrate them. But it would be much nicer if you can just use one framework to build both the front end and the back end, and the integration part takes care of itself. Because most of the errors that we find in a code comes from integration of front end and back end. If the APIs are not properly configured and are not properly used in the front end, then there could be some integration issues there as well. So this is why we use the front end and back end framework. All right. So now that that is done, let's take a look at some front end frameworks. So as we've discussed, we have front end frameworks, which are just libraries that have a lot of commonly built features that when building a front end are required. So these are the front end frameworks that we'll be taking a look at. These are some of the most popular ones. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but these are the most popular ones and the ones most in demand right now. In case you have any questions regarding these technologies that we have discussed or anything that we have discussed earlier, put them in the chat box and we'll be more than happy to answer. Now, take a look at one of these technologies one by one. First one is Angular. If you've been doing web development for any reasonable number of time, AngularJS is a framework that has to have come across your way. This is one of the most popular frameworks, especially because it has been built by Google and new features are being released every day. It's being updated at a rapid pace. This is not to be confused with AngularJS though, mainly because Angular and AngularJS are two completely different frameworks that have different philosophies of on how you should build an application. So just to give you a quick overview, AngularJS is the first version. So version 1.0 is known as AngularJS. It was also released by Google. It is very popular among front-end developers still, and it is used mainly because when it was released, many new applications were built using AngularJS, and small to mid-sized applications worked okay, but larger sized applications couldn't sustain its code base because Angular used a lot of different tricks that could lead to performance degradation if not used correctly, and getting them correct was quite a task. So these applications would work fine. AngularJS takes care of a lot of the commonly used tasks as well. But Google came across the problem that we are discussing right now, that larger applications were not working very well with the AngularJS framework. So what they did was they created a new version of Angular in which they completely rewrote it, created components out of Angular, and instead of AngularJS being the way it is, which was just a jumble of code, now you can create components out of your framework. It was really modular. You can create small modules out of it. Each module will take care of one single task, and some tasks will be taken care of by the views. Some tasks like authentication will be taken care of by some other modules, and there are many other kinds of things. So this is what we can do as of now. So Angular JS and Angular are two frameworks. Angular is the newest one. From version 2.0, Angular JS was renamed to Angular. Angular JS is still supported by Google, and many people use it, especially because they have built applications with Angular JS, and those applications still exist, and the code base is really large. So porting it over to Angular could take a lot of time because it's an entirely new framework. Which one should you use? I would recommend that you use the newest version of Angular because it contains most of the new features, bug fixes, improvements, performance improvements, and many other kind of things. So use Angular. Now, Angular is not really easy to learn, and it does a lot of things for you. But since it does a lot of things for you, it could be a little difficult to wrap your head around it. On the other hand, React is quite different. React is a front-end JavaScript framework created by Facebook, and it mainly deals with efficiently rendering component based on application state. Basically, it means that when you all you need to do is you need to declare your components. Components are nothing but slices of HTML in which you define one specific aspect of your application, such as a button or a carousel or a slider or any other kind of thing. After you have created your component, that component needs some data to display itself. Data such as if the user is logged in, then you need to display a logout button in your navigation bar. And if the user is logged out, then you need to display a login button on your navigation bar. Data just to make sure that the element being displayed on the screen matches your use case. So that's called application state. The data in your application that is stored is called application state, and how to switch between components, how to update those components when the data changes, how to keep things in sync in a way that the developer specifies is what React does. React does not do a lot of different kinds of things, although you can use libraries and packages to enhance and extend its features. It's mostly popular for creating and efficiently rendering components on the screen. It uses the concept of a virtual DOM. Virtual DOM is quite an important concept. As the virtual DOM is very useful, we also need to understand how we're going to how virtual DOM works, which is a bit advanced for us to use. But when you're trying to build an application at a larger scale, do take a look at how virtual DOM works. It's a really nice way of doing things, and it can also show you what you can use React and how you can use it most efficiently. It's quite easier to use than Angular. So consider using React when you're trying to build an application and you only want to take care of the front end of the components. You don't need to, you can use Fetch or you can use Axios or other kinds of libraries to do other tasks such as data fetching and all of that. If you are okay with that, then React is probably your best bet. Then comes Vue.js. Now, Vue.js is quite different from React. It's quite similar to Angular, in fact. Angular and Vue have quite similar structures. If you're using an Angular application or if you have built Angular applications and you want to build Vue applications, it's not going to be very difficult for you. Vue applications are quite easy to use as well. But the thing about Vue.js is that it could be considered an easier version of Angular. Angular and Vue are kept quite in sync. Vue.js is quite useful, so is Angular. So if you want to use Vue.js and you tried Angular, it makes sense, but it's a little difficult for you to get started with it, then you should try Vue. Vue.js is a front-end JavaScript framework that was created by Ivan Yu. It's very similar to Angular. So if you have used Angular, then you can think of Vue.js as being kind of similar, and it's very easy and useful as well. So we recommend that you use Vue.js if Angular seems a bit tough for you, but you liked its approach. And then comes Ember.js. Now Ember.js is an older framework. It came well before all the three frameworks that we are describing. It was created by Yehuda Katz. He was also a contributor in Ruby on Rails and Sprout Core 1.0. Then when Sprout Core, which is also a library, was upgraded to version 2.0, Ember.js came out of that. So Ember.js earlier was known as Sprout Core. And what Ember.js does is that it's also a full-fledged framework. It does a lot of things. It has dedicated packages for doing many kinds of tasks, such as templating, getting data from the internet, keeping your data in sync, and routing, and many other kinds of things that you might need to worry about if you're building a front-end web application. Uh, to understand which one to use out of these four, you should, in our opinion, try all of those. They all have great tutorials on the documentation. Try out those tutorials, see if the way that these application frameworks work makes sense to you. If it resonates with you, then use those frameworks. If not, then we recommend that you use React. Try out all of those, but if all of them don't give you a sort of satisfactory feeling, then we would recommend going forward with React. Also, there are other frameworks and libraries available for front end as well. You can take a look at those as well, but these are the four most popular ones for the front end. All right, let's take a look at backend frameworks. So backend frameworks are used to build the backend of a web application that deals with the request response cycle of a web server. If you've ever built a backend of an application, you know that it's not an easy task. You need to understand how the backend works, what are the different kinds of things that you do when you're building a backend of an application, how do you keep the backend services in sync with the data. You can use new technologies like WebSockets to create a bi-directional communication, but then there's a lot of overhead there and there's a lot of complicated details that you need to hash out when you're trying to use a backend application. So if you're using just raw Node.js, no framework, just the Node.js platform, then it can be a little difficult. Although Node.js is quite easy to use, when you're using Node.js to build an entire application, it comes to be a little difficult. So we recommend that you use one of the frameworks that we are describing. Let's take a look at those one by one. So the first one is Express.js. In case you've never used Express.js, it's by far the most popular Node.js backend framework. It's a micro framework. So if you are planning on using Node.js, then you should understand that it's a micro framework. It doesn't do a lot of different kinds of things. It is a thin layer over the simple request response cycle. It allows you to do routing, error handling, request response cycle and parsing, and a little bit of other things such as logging and all. But overall, that's all the services that it provides, and you can integrate it with other applications quite easily. So other application frameworks such as for query string, there are query string parameters, and there are other frameworks available to integrate as well. So for instance, if you want to interact with a MongoDB backend, database, then you can use the Mongoose package. It integrates quite well with Express. If you want to use backend HTML templating, which is basically you create an HTML template. When user looks for a particular URL, you return that HTML template, but with the data populated from the database. In cases like this, you can use backend templating engines like Pug or Nunjucks, or many others are available. Express.js doesn't have any opinions on how you wish to use it. You can use it with any other kind of application. You can integrate it quite easily with different kinds of libraries and frameworks. It's very easy to use. Then comes Sales.js. Sales.js is a full-fledged application framework. It's a little different from Express because Express only provides some high-level functionalities and others rest are left up to you. So you can develop it yourself. On the other hand, Sales.js is a full-fledged application framework, very much like Ruby on Rails or Django. It takes care of a lot of things like object relational mapping, URL routing, templating, paging, caching, and many other kinds of things. It has several libraries available to it as well. Many developers like using Sales.js because of its full-fledged requirements. So if you are using Sales.js, do note that you get a lot out of the box, but the documentation can be a little difficult to get your head around. So just make sure that you understand that. Then comes Happy.js. It's a relatively newer framework, but it's quite useful. It takes care of a lot of different kinds of things, ranging from request response parsing to object relational mapping, and it integrates well with other object relational mappers as well. I would recommend that you use Happy.js first if you wish to understand what Happy.js are. But most importantly, try and understand the basic functionalities of all of these application frameworks that we're discussing so that you understand how to use them. Then comes Koa.js. Now, Koa.js is the newest in these frameworks. You can use them quite easily. They're quite useful as well. Koa.js comes not with a lot of features, but it implements a few features and it does it well. It's been around for a less amount of time, so we would recommend if you're trying to use it, try using it on your personal projects first. And if you don't find any bugs and you think that it works really well for you, if you find it easier to use, then you can use Koa.js as well. There are many other kinds of things that you can use, but we would recommend that you start with Express. Although if you wish to check out all of these, that's more than better. But if you are trying to get started, Express.js is quite easy. Its documentation is quite thin because of the less number of features that it provides. It integrates well with other frameworks as well, and it is used. It is very popular on the internet, so a lot of blog posts about integrating it with other applications and libraries as well are available. You can take a look at those. Now we come to full stack frameworks. So a full stack framework is used to build both front end and back end of an application. Now this sounds like a very trivial thing to do because we know how to build the front end using one of these things. We know how to use the back end using the other things. So we can use any other kinds of front end and back end in our applications. And integrating them is going to be a little difficult because we have built both of these things separately. The technologies used in both of those are not the same. And because the platforms are so different, it's going to be a little difficult. On the other hand, there are some frameworks who take the approach of using using a single code base to describe both the front end and the back end. In cases like this, we use the full stack framework. Let's take a look at those one by one. So the first one is Next.js. If you never use Next.js, it uses React as the front end and you can define your own backend there. Backend in Next.js allows you to create an API server through which you can respond to particular URL requests. Now, it's not necessary that you only use this. You can use other frameworks as well. But Next.js is especially popular because it's been maintained. It's in its 10th version. It has a lot of great features. It takes care of the entire build process. It has a lot of features that you can take a look at. It's easier to use than other front-end full stack frameworks and even front-end and back-end frameworks that are available. It focuses on a few things and it does it really well. So we recommend that you check out Next.js. If you have worked with React and Express.js and you like how those work, then Next.js might be a great option for you. In case you have not worked with React and you have not worked with Express.js as well, then trying out Next.js might be a little funny coming directly from HTML and pure JavaScript to this. But we recommend that you try out both of them and then use Next.js. Preferably try out both front-end and back-end frameworks of your choice, then jump into full-stack frameworks. Then comes Meteor.js. Meteor.js is not just a framework, it is also a platform for building both front-end, back-end, and mobile applications as well. It uses JavaScript as its core language. Everyone can use JavaScript. You should use JavaScript. JavaScript can be used to build both mobile applications, although the mobile application that is being built is a hybrid mobile application, which means it's not a native mobile application. It's a simple mobile application that is wrapped in a web view. Using technologies like Ionic and other, we integrate the entire application into one. So if you want to build native mobile applications, there are other frameworks available, there are other libraries, there are other code bases available. But if you have an application, web application, and you just want to turn it to a mobile application where you just serve a little bit of content, then you can use Meteor.js to build a hybrid application. Now, it's not necessary that you only use Meteor. There are other platforms available as well that can integrate really well with your application of choice. But we would recommend that you use Meteor.js because it allows you to do a lot of different things. All right. So with that, we have come to the end of the presentation. We have discussed 10 frameworks. If I were to go through them again, for front end, we discussed Angular, we discussed React, Vue, and Ember.js. You should use all of those and get a feel of which one to use. We recommend using React because it's the simplest and the most powerful out of those, but you can use others as well. There are other frameworks available in case you wish to take a look at those, such as Backbone and others. But React is right now the most famous one. Then comes backend framework. We have Express.js, we have Koa.js, Sales.js, and Happy.js. Express is by far the most popular. Sales is by far the most powerful because it comes with a lot of features out of the box. Try out Express first. Try out all of those, but we recommend using Express first because it's the easiest to get started with. Then comes full stack framework. Here we only have discussed two, Next.js and Meteor.js, because these are the two most popular. Others don't have that great of a support. If you want to build both front end and back end using a single code base, use full stack frameworks. We recommend using Next.js if you just want to build the web application. If you have plans of migrating it over to a mobile application that's not a native mobile application, but a hybrid one, which is wrapped inside a web view, then you can take a look at Meteor.js as well. Or both of these frameworks are good. We recommend using Next.js because it works better and integrates better with the front end and back end technologies. All right. So with that, we have come to the end of the presentation. Hopefully this has been informative. Consider clicking the subscribe button and the notification icon so that when we produce more content like this, you can get notified. Also click the like button if you liked this, and you can put down in the comments what else would you like to know. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next presentation.